Now, on the 16th of October, we had a discussion here about issues to do with regulations that have been put in place to strengthen building standards in our country. There were so many comments that came in from you, dear listener, about this particular issue. My guests that day were from the National Building Review Board. And I would like to tell you that given the issues that we continue to contend with as a country when it comes to issues of construction, building generally, they are back in studio today to continue with that discussion, but also to help us understand better the regulations that are in place to strengthen the building standards in our country. Let me introduce the guests. Engineer Anthony Ruchuke, Manager for Investigations, National Building Review Board. Good evening, Engineer. Thank you very much for honoring us with your presence today.
Good evening, Kenneth, and good evening, our listeners.
Also in studio, Mr. Herbert Ziwa, Manager Communications, National Building Review Board, always a journalist. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Always a journalist. Good evening, our listeners, and good evening, Kenneth.
All right. Just before we dive into some of the questions that were left hanging the other day as submitted by the listeners, let's give them a picture to refresh their minds about what the National Building Review Board does and where it finds its mandate.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. And before I do that, I want to appreciate the players in the building sector who have participated in the National Building Control Awards. And I want to let them know that we are going to hold the ceremony on 4th December, Wednesday next week, at Speak Resort Munyonyo, starting at 6 p.m. So the nominees and the sector players who have been invited, we expect you in Munyonyo on 4th December to be part of this experience. These awards are under the theme Building for Sustainability. We are appreciating individuals, organizations that are doing something to ensure that the built environment is sustainable. Back to your question.
Wait, before you actually go further,
yes.
What is the rationale of these awards? You know, you're supposed to be controlling standards. Now you're giving awards.
Yes, Kenneth and the listeners, we appreciate that the sector still has a number of challenges in regards to the building accidents, the standards of buildings, and so many others. But in the same vein, there are players within the sector, individuals and organizations that are doing something to ensure that our sector is safe and is also compliant. So we need to appreciate these efforts. That's why we came up with the National Building Control Awards as a token of appreciation to those individuals and organizations that are doing something extraordinary in the sector. So that's the rationale, and it is timely. We should appreciate them for their efforts. I think back to the first question, what we do as the National Building Review Board. Our listeners, NBRB is an agency under the Ministry of Works and Transport, and we've been in existence since 2018. We were created by the by the Building Control Act of 2013, which was passed by Parliament. Our mandate in the Act is found in Section 8. 1, we monitor all building developments in the country. The buildings in Kampala, the buildings in the villages, the buildings in cities, in municipalities, in town councils, in districts are monitored by the National Building Review Board. We also ensure that buildings to which the public has access to cater for persons living with disabilities. The buildings, the public buildings, the churches, the hospitals, the schools, the hotels, administrative buildings, they have access for people living with disabilities. Our third mandate is to come up with fees that are supposed to be charged for building operations. And these fees are determined, 1, by the location of the building. Is it in the city? Is it in the town council? Is it in the municipality or in the district? Secondly, the fees are determined according to the classification of the building. Buildings are classified according to the Building Control Regulations of 2020 in 3 categories. 1, Class A. We have Class B and Class C. The fourth mandate of the board is to monitor the operations of the building committees. Now, under our Act, cities, municipalities, districts, and town councils must have building committees. Those building committees are responsible for all building operations in their areas. Kenneth, if you want to ask for a building permit, for example, in Masaka, you don't need to come to National Building Review Board. Just go to Masaka, where you want to construct, ask for a building permit from the building committee. It will be given to you. But on top of the building committee, there's the National Building Review Board that monitors how this building committee operates. The last responsibility of the board is to listen to appeals from individuals and organizations that are not satisfied by the decisions of the building committees. If, for example, you go to the building committee to ask for a building permit, maybe there are some delays, or you assume you've been charged exorbitantly, you have an opportunity to come and appeal to us as the National Building Review Board. So that is what we've been doing, and we continue doing as the National Building Review Board to monitor and regulate this sector to ensure that it is safe and compliant.
All right.
Yes.
This discussion is going to be about the regulations that are in place.
Yes.
Some of the regulations that you've put in place, some of the actions that you've taken as a National Building Review Board to ensure that we have standards as far as building industry is concerned. And I'll come to you, Engineer Ruchoshe. Quickly, if you can throw some light on some of these regulations that we have. What are some of the things that guide this sector to ensure that we have standards?
Okay, thank you very much, Kenneth, and good evening, listeners, once again. So in terms of the built environment and the legal control framework, Herbert did mention that our law that governs building control is the Building Control Act 2013. Recently we had a new listing of the laws, of the principal laws of the country. So for those that are using the new listing, it would be chapter 136. So when it was assented to and commenced in 2018, the building control regulations that then help the board and other agencies to use the Act for Building Control were published in 2020. There was also a gap in terms of the building codes, the whole spectrum from the standards themselves to the design code to accessibility issues in our structures, and all these are now in place. We have building codes, standards, electrical installations, mechanical installations, accessibility of buildings, and we also have the fees regulations in place. So the entire building control legal framework comprises of all these that I have talked about. But for the layman out there that probably has not heard of these laws or not even read them, what does building control require of you as a developer, as a potential developer? So one, it requires that you engage people that understand construction, that we call professionals, to do the construction on your behalf. Because me as a developer who has never been in an engineering class simply does not know what I'm supposed to do for buildings. So the law now requires explicitly that you must engage professionals at both stages of design and construction. In the investigations we've done over the years, particularly in the last 4 years or so, the biggest cause of accidents, building accidents, is basically an absence of professionals, both in design, so people are building based on guesswork, but also in construction, because having a design is one thing and having it approved, but then on the other end, this design must be interpreted and implemented as accurately as possible. So the developer must engage professionals. 2, you must obtain a building permit or building permission from the building committees, which, as Herbert said, exist at all urban and local authorities. And the building committee will peruse your submissions and satisfy themselves that indeed what you propose to put up is safe, and they will issue a building permit. The law now also requires you that, yes, you have a building permit you've constructed, but you must also get an occupation permit, because you know a lot of things could change between building permission and what you've actually put up. And again, you go back to the building committee and apply for an occupation permit, and that occupation permit is the assurance that government gives you and the occupants of that building that indeed that structure has been constructed in accordance with what was approved at design stage. So those are the bare minimums. Engage professionals, have building permits and have occupation permits, and then you can rest assured that to a good degree you are in a safe building that will not fall on you in the rains that we have experienced recently.
Right, we had a discussion the other time about some of the decisions that had been taken by the minister on some materials, and of course that discussion we had that day actually brought out a number of comments that some were not responded to. So at this point, I want us to focus a little bit on those issues that came out as we continue with this particular discussion. So I'll read out some of the comments and you respond to them. Please. We had a comment coming in from Dembe Dumba, who was listening in from Bukoto. He said, what measures are in place to ensure that town councils, districts, cities and municipals appoint them based on their professional competence? And that was in regard to members of the building committees. What are the building committees? Let's begin from there and then you respond to this question.
So the building committees are the committees that are in charge of building control at your local authority level. So the districts and town councils would have a building committee. Now, Mr. Dembe, if I got the name correct,
Dembe Dumba in Bukoto.
Yes, is inquiring on how do we ensure that the people there are competent on the building committee. Now, we must note that one, this building committee, I'll come to its composition shortly. The technical advisor of the building committee is a building control officer who is a public servant and is technical by training and is designated as such to advise the building committee. But the building committee itself, if you get the act, it will be section 27. And it says that this building committee established at each district and urban authority will have one, the chief administrative officer, who is the accounting officer for that area, the town clerk for the case of a town or urban authority. It will have the chairperson of the planning and development committee of the district council or the equivalent committee that is in charge of planning and development. It will have an officer responsible for physical planning, because we are building in an area that ideally should have been planned as part of a physical planning master plan. So you need a physical planner there, or the officer in charge of physical planning, to be sure that yes, even if this application has come in with a development permit, that there are no mistakes that have been made previously that may need to be arrested at this stage. It also has the officer responsible for health to cater for the public health issues, the officer responsible for engineering to do the engineering checks, the officer responsible for land management, the officer responsible for environmental management, the officer responsible for architecture, a representative of the persons with disabilities, who is nominated by the National Council for Disability at district level, an officer from the police department responsible for fire prevention, and a member of the district executive committee. So the law does not leave much leeway for someone to sit there and say, I know Kenneth Anderson Lukwago, and this is an opportunity for him to get some sitting allowances. Let me put him on the building committee. No. The appointing authority, who is the accounting officer, the CAO, is restricted on who actually sits on the building committee. Now, of course, listeners, we know that some districts may, for example, not have architects. You had people saying, for us in Karamoja, we probably have one architect in the entire region. How will he do this? The regulations and guidance given to the effect that if you do not have some of these people in the district structures, the building committee has powers to co-opt. So they can, for example, write to Uganda Society of Architects or the Uganda Institution of Professional Engineers and say, we need a mechanical engineer, because in our area, the engineer we have is only civil and is not competent to peruse the electrical drawings or the mechanical drawings. So please recommend us someone that can sit in as a co-opted member to help in that aspect. And the framework allows for that. So we do not want people to sit back and say, of the many members of the committee, because we don't have these in our established structures, then we can't have a building committee. You are allowed to co-opt, and we've also guided on how the co-opted members can be remunerated in terms of their time input. So the person asked the question from Bukoto, rest assured that the appointing authority for the building committees has been limited by the provisions in the Act and will only appoint people who are competent in those different responsibilities.
All right, we have another comment. Thank you for bringing the National Building Review Board members. We apologize that we failed to maintain engineers when constructing, even after having used them during the application stages. But the reason is because these people many times charge exorbitantly. How do you justify a plan of 15 million for a 3-bedroom house, and fellow now wants to charge another 20 million for supervision, which happens sometimes once a week during construction? That's a comment that came in from Davis. Do we have a mechanism to determine how much the plans should actually cost? Is that in your purview? Is it in your power?
The engineer is here.
The quickest answer would be no. It's not within our powers to determine professional fees. But for the listeners out there, it is important that they have an idea of what is considered a fair fee. While not discounting the allegation that the engineers are very expensive, I know that in some cases we have engineers telling you figures which are very low, and you know they will not do the work. Listeners, if someone gives you a very low figure for a design and supervision, he's just going to give you a job that is not optimized. If a job that I will spend on 7 days, you're paying me effectively for 2 days, the engineer will be tempted to give you a design that is uneconomic because the time input to optimize it has not been compensated for. That said, the closest reference I can use is the engineer's scale of fees, which has been published by the regulator of engineers in this country, the Engineers Registration Board. And their estimation or guidance is that, for example, a structural engineer that helps give you specifications to make your structure stand amidst the loads, their costs, according to that engineer's scale of fees, their costs they estimated to be between 3% and 4.5% of your project cost. The electrical engineer, 0.8%, between 0.8% and 1.2%. The mechanical engineer, another 0.8 to 1.2%. So if you add all these up and say, I need a structural engineer, an electrical engineer, and a mechanical engineer, you're talking about between 4.6% and 6.9%. Let's take 5%. So if your structure is a modest 200 million project, and I know most of us have spent that money on Class B structures, we are basically saying, in your estimation, 5% of that should be budgeted for consultancy and supervision, for professional fees. 5% of 200 million is 10 million. So in my estimation, if I have a simple structure and it's going to cost me 200 million, I'm thinking an engineer that asks me in the range of 10 million shillings will most likely do a proper job.
Well, I'm sure you're familiar with this. As a child, maybe you moved around some parts of this country and you saw a building and you said, in future, I want to construct that kind of building. You probably even had a chance of going inside the building and looking at the rooms, and you have an idea in your mind what kind of structure you want to put on. Well, I know the kind of building I want to set up. Why should I incur this cost? Why?
For a professional
to come and plan and determine how the design should be. I have a picture in my mind what I want to do. Why not just bring the builder?
Yes, you have a picture, but to actualize that picture, you need a professional. One, you need an architect to actualize that picture you have in your head.
Do I?
Yes, you need. Because
will the building refuse to go up?
Let me give you an example. Say the building you're talking about was on the hill, and then you want to construct yours similar to what you saw on the hill.
In a wetland.
Let me say in a wetland with, of course, permission and approvals from NEMA. Are you going to use the same materials?
Well, we have seen how people construct in wetlands.
That's why you need a professional to guide you.
Put in stones,
to guide you. That's why we are discouraging people who buy designs. Someone sees a design somewhere on a street and they buy it.
There are so many online.
And they want to implement and start constructing that very design. It is not possible.
There are some companies of architecture who actually have drawings online. You can pay to get that particular design. Are you saying that's wrong?
It's very wrong. Because those designs are for specific projects. You can't use that same design in Kampala, in Masaka, in Kamocha, in Gulu. No. Because the terrain is different.
And Kenneth,
and the requirements are also different.
All right.
We had an unfortunate incident. Now, of course, with AI.
Closer to the mic.
Yes.
Now, with AI, we have artistic impressions that you can download off the internet, even without an architect. So this particular case in Nansana, so someone had a structure, and then I think they went to the internet and found very good lighting, but this lighting needed an overhang. So he said, I can't do this. So you basically extended a slab for him to have the lighting over his balcony. The slab was not supported. There was no engineer to help because the builder said, we can't do that. In the middle of construction, that overhang comes down and kills a worker. Now, that's very unfortunate because in the Uganda of today, when one Ugandan dies, the ripple effect is multiplied by 10. You're affecting 10 plus Ugandans. You're destroying or significantly affecting the future of many other people.
All right.
And yet, if you had just asked an engineer of how do I actually suspend this, have my lighting, but make sure it does not fall down, the engineer could easily have done that for a very minimal fee.
All right.
Kenneth, Kenneth and Ugandans, we are saying that if you want to put up a building, please allow the professionals to do their work. They will save you costs. They will also save lives that are likely to be lost when this building comes down. Imagine putting up a storied building of maybe 4 floors and you've not engaged a structural engineer. How are you going to measure the weight of this building? What are you going to put in the columns? How are you going to determine the materials you're going to use for this building? That's why you need a professional. And we've had that challenge with the so-called Bagaga. Let me call them Bagaga of sort. Who want to use the same people they used when they are still looking for this money. They want to use the same people when they get money. You find someone using a non-professional. I'll cite an example of a building that collapsed some years ago in Machindi. We carried out an investigation and found out that the person who was in charge of this building was a P2 dropout. Supervising a site.
Engineer.
A site
engineer
of 4 floors and above. This is unacceptable, and it fell down and killed people. We want to avoid such cases by engaging professionals.
All right. A comment came in from Enid, listening in from SETA, inquiring whether I can be assisted. My neighbor is building a storied commercial house. After the ground floor, he added on the side some rooms for shops, not on the plan, entering the road to my premises and narrowing it. I talked to him, but he became adamant. Went to the sub-county chief where I was referred. He said he has gotten a call from above, so no help. Can the building committee be of any help? Then there's another person who actually wrote in complaining about delays. He says he has a complaint about the building committees. They take long to actually clear plans. Still on the same issue of the building committees, he says, engineers, physical planners, and health inspectors who charge exorbitant processing fees, money which is not receipted. If not paid, your drawings will rot in their offices. There is a municipality where they have ever charged my client more than 100% of the official tax as processing fees. Very pathetic. That is EA, who was listening in from Bweyo Gerere.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. The person who was called in from SETA, we advise that person to go to Mukono. There's a building committee there, and present her issues. If she fails to get redress from that building committee, then she can appeal to us as the National Building Review Board. She can be assisted. On the other issue of the time taken to issue building permits.
Actually, there's somebody else who actually also made a question about Mukono, Engineer Jacob Nsubuga, who said,
please,
the building committees, Sample Case Mukono Municipality, they take ages to approve to approve building drawings when everything has been provided. He has a plan that was submitted in February 2023, but to date is not approved, and no communication from the authority. How can the local man be helped? So there are issues to do with delays of the building committees.
There are a number of issues that cause the delays Ugandans are talking about. One, sometimes these delays are blamed on the building committees, yet actually the delays are caused by maybe the professionals. Some developers take their designs to the professionals for designing, and they take long to get them back. So that time is also blamed on the building committee. And in our laws, the building committee has 30 days to respond to a developer or about the decision they have taken, whether to issue the building permit or otherwise.
All right.
So after 30 days, if you have no response from the building committee, when you have submitted whatever is required of you, please appeal to us as the National Building Review Board.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. We are reflecting on issues to do with building standards. I have officials from the National Building Review Board here to respond to some of the questions that you brought across the other time. But feel free to drop more questions. I already see a number of them coming in online via the WhatsApp line 0703-090-090. We are taking a break now. When we return, we will continue taking responses on these particular questions that are already in and also the others that are coming in. Stay tuned. Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum continues after this. Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Live on Radio 1 FM 90. Understanding the regulations to strengthen building standards in Uganda is our topic of discussion today. My guest, Engineer Anthony Ruchoke, Manager for Investigation, National Building Review Board, Mr. Herbert Ziwa, Manager Communications at the same entity. We're still reflecting on some of the questions that came in, but the case of Mukono seems to be very unique. We already have another comment coming in from Komakech Job, who is in Mukono, who says district building committees are simply another wastage of public resources. That's a comment there, which rhymes very well with a comment that came in a little bit earlier from a listener who talked about time wastage in Mukono district there. Anything you want to say there before we actually get in more comments? We still have a number of them here.
Yes. Final on the time of the on the issue of the time wasted in the process of building permit applications. We encourage Ugandans to use the building industry management system, our online platform that has digitized all the building control processes. Now you don't need to walk to the building committee to ask for a building permit. You can use your phone, you can use your computer, as long as you have internet, and ask for a building permit. On the issue of the fees, as I said in the beginning, the fees that are charged are known. They are charged according to the size of your building and its location. And they are in the building control fees regulations of 2020. You can go on our website of NBRB and get the fees, such that by the time you go to the building committee to ask for a building permit, you know how much you're supposed to pay to avoid being charged exorbitantly. If at all you're charged exorbitantly, please, you can also come to NBRB and report. We shall contact that building committee and ask them questions why they are charging people fees that are outside the regulations.
There's a follow-up from Brani who actually says, if somebody appealed to you, the National Building Review Board,
yes,
when the building committees are not acting on their, application,
yes,
how long will it take you as a board to review the dispute?
Thank you very much, Kenneth and Drani, for that question. We have the Building Control Appeal Procedure Regulations 2021, which guide on the process for hearing and determining appeals. And those regulations give NBRB a maximum of 60 days to issue a decision.
60 days.
So within 60 days, we'll have written the building committee that you're appealing against to ask them for written submission. We'll hold hearings, either one party or both parties at the same time, and then we'll make a determination on that. And the regulations give NBRB powers to either set aside a decision of the building committee or reverse it or confirm it. So we have 60 days, no plus, within which your appeal will have been determined. And we want Ugandans to make use of this avenue. It is your right to appeal any decision without fear that you're going to be victimized. And a decision made on an appeal by NBRB is only overturned by the High Court.
All right, we have a comment coming in from Hoima City. Robert is saying there are so many substandard buildings in slum areas, especially in Kampala. Are you likely to reduce the number of such buildings? Are you going to take them down? That's his question there. Robert from the oil city in Hoima.
Thank you, Robert, for that question. The Building Control Act, of course, like we said, was only enacted in 2013 and commenced in 2018. So the question is, what happens to buildings that pre-existed the Act? And the Act, yes, has provision for the minister guiding on the period within which the buildings that came before the Act would be brought into conformance with this Act. And that's work in progress. The idea is that as a bare minimum, the new stock of buildings after 2018 must comply. And then the inspectors at the local councils, again, the Building Control Office, which is headed by the Building Control Officer and his assistants, in their regular inspections, in case they come upon structures that are dilapidated, that are a threat to human life, they have powers to actually order the developers to do maintenance, and if maintenance is not possible, then to recommend demolition of the same. So the first priority is new stock to be compliant, but also the responsibility to do inspections in their jurisdictions lies with the Building Control Officer and his assistants and the inspectors of works, and these can make recommendations for any actions that need to be taken with regards to the safety of the occupants of these structures.
David writes in and said, do those guys have standards for indigenous structures such as wood and wattle, thatched huts, like the beautiful Acholi, Alur, Karamojong huts, very ideal for promoting indigenous architecture and tourism? Do we have standards for mud and wattle? No, but Kenneth and the listeners, it's important to remember that the standards, while they prescribe how to do certain things, because of the innovations and creativity of people and methods of construction that may not have been studied in detail, the standards cannot be applied in a blanket manner. So for the mud and water, I can confirm that there are no standards. So the question would be that, are they illegal structures? And the answer is no. There is a provision in the Building Control Act which deals with what it calls non-conventional methods. So the conventional ones, the steel, the concrete, the timber, the masonry, we have prescribed methods and how to approach them, and the professionals would understand how to use these codes to come up with designs with these materials. So any material that is outside the code provisions at the moment is what it calls a non-conventional method. And it says if you have a non-conventional method, please apply to the building committee and say, I want to use the age-old method of mud and water and round huts and my grass thatch, and I'm convinced that it works, and demonstrate to the building committee that in terms of the functional requirements of safety, of serviceability, of comfort, that they would satisfy the overall objective of the building code. And they will be approved. All right.
Yes.
One of the other burning issue that actually came out during that discussion, and I'm still seeing some questions coming about it, is the decision by the minister to maintain a ban on what you call the STC. So what exactly is STC, and why is there a ban issued by the minister? I have a couple of other questions about that particular issue, but let's hear from you first.
The STC is an abbreviation for steel, timber, and concrete. Composite method of construction. And I want our listeners to understand that this has nothing to do with the materials themselves. From time immemorial, we have worked with steel, we've worked with concrete, we've worked with timber. But STC was peculiar in the sense that the way they were being combined and the method sold, it was a one-size-fits-all. So you go to a promoter and he'll tell you buy 100 by 100 timber, put a mesh at the bottom and the top, put BRC mesh, give me 100 millimeters of concrete, and you're ready to go. This is not dependent on design. And like Herbert said earlier, you cannot have two designs in different locations and different user needs being the same. So from an engineering perspective, you cannot buy a design off the shelf. Now, the problem we had here is that, yes, this came up, it was being marketed as such, patents were being claimed, and was being sold to people as the magic solution to the issues and challenges we have to industry. So then BRB took interest in this and did a study, and they found several issues that were disconcerting, that were pointed to unsafety and risky. And they advised the minister then, 2022, to ban the method, and he did. We did another study, now with an independent team with more specialities to look into this with an idea of possibly issuing guidelines on how it can be made safe. That study has also been concluded, and the conclusion, one of the many but the premier one, is that the method as it is, as sold off the shelf, is simply unsafe, and the minister decided in his wisdom to withhold a ban.
All right, we have a comment coming in from Lawrence, who is listening in from Entebbe. He says, how do these review boards and committee guys do their work? I have been constructing several buildings since 2018. Currently, I have a project in Kajansi scheduled for roof terrace concrete works over the weekend. I also have another building in Kira, currently at the second floor. However, in all my buildings, including these two, no one from the committees or the board has ever stepped on site to check anything. So they don't know whether we have qualified engineers on site, or if we are implementing the approved designs, or we are casting the correct class of concrete or not. These committee guys only go to sites that don't have approved drawings, but don't care about what happens in sites with approved drawings. Is there a gap? The drawings are already approved. You only go to sites that are do not have approved drawings.
Let me start from.
Do you follow up to ensure that these people are actually complying to what they signed up to?
Yes, but then I will discuss the context of extent. I think our listeners...
And it seems that Lawrence is being a whistleblower.
He's confusing so many things.
Whistleblowing against himself.
Confusing monitoring, inspection.
He wants you to go to his site.
He's confusing many things.
So we have three aspects that usually get confused. One is monitoring, which Herbert said is the monitoring of the work of the building committees, is the work of NBRB. And one of the ways we do that is actually to do audits. So, for example, the last two sessions, we've had a lot of grievances against Mukono, and our compliance department will take an interest in Mukono. So the next audit of Mukono will probably be more detailed than previously done, because from our listeners, it seems there's an issue with Mukono. The second word is supervision. Supervision of construction is the work of professionals who are engaged by developers. So things to do with concrete grade, is it strong, is it meeting the specifications as designed and the like, is the work of professionals who are engaged to supervise. The last word is inspection.
Are they under you? Those who do the supervision?
No. The supervisors are professionals engaged by the developers, and if me as a supervisor am failing in my duty of care, the developer can report me to my regulator. I'm a civil engineer, for example. I'm regulated by the Engineers Registration Board, which gives me a stamp and gives me a practicing license. So if I'm not doing my work, any person that is aggrieved can go to ERB and say, Anthony Ruchuche, who holds your stamp and a license, is failing in his duty of care, please discipline him. And we've had cases like that. The third question, the third word, Kenneth, quickly, is inspection. Inspection is the duty of the building control officer, who, like I said, is a public servant. His job is not to supervise your construction. The supervisor should be on site every day. The inspector is supposed to come at some stop points. For example, like Lawrence says, when he's casting a slab, the law requires that he informs the building control officer that he's going to cast a slab.
He also has a duty of care.
Yes. The developer also has a duty of care. You inform the building control officer that I'm going to cast on Saturday. Please come and do an inspection. And please note that once you have a building permit, you have paid inspection fees for the first 12 months. I know there will be cases of people saying, these people want money and the like. Once you have a permit for the first 12 months of your construction, you have paid for inspection fees, and the building control officers and the inspectors and the assistants should do their duty. So those are three different aspects. Are we doing enough? Of course, we monitor the work of the building committees, so we can't just say this is for the building committees, this is not our business. If they don't perform, then we also don't perform as a regulator. So Are we doing enough? And in my opinion, I think we can do more. We need more presence of the inspectors. We need more presence in terms of enforcement, because when these inspectors go to sites of people who are building without permits or without approved drawings, we need an enforcement action.
All right.
So we need more human resources at these local governments. We need more inspectors, and we need more presence on the ground.
Maybe Kenneth, to add on.
Yes, very quickly.
Rollins should know that the building sector, the developers are part of the stakeholders, and they play a key role in ensuring that the sector is safe. So do not just construct something for the sake of constructing, because at the end of it all, you're the developer, you're losing money. And when this building collapses and comes down, you never know, you might be the one on site, not the building control officer, not the building committee members or members of NBRB. So monitoring and compliance is a concerted effort. It is for all of us. It is not for only the building committee. So don't deliberately break the law because nobody is seeing you, because the building committee officers or because the building control officer has not come to inspect your site. Please do what is right to avoid the consequences.
All right, David has a follow-up. Over 80% of dwellings in Uganda use local materials and indigenous architecture techniques. Why hasn't the building board undertaken or commissioned technical studies on indigenous housing structures than hiding them as high as non-conventional building structures? But also we have another comment coming in from Kibeti Patrick Nabtanyi, who is listening in from Bududa District. Says, good evening. We are listening to you loud and clear. Inform the gentleman in studio that timber is cheaper than metals and rots fast. As a layperson from Bududa, I would recommend that we stick on metals rather than the wood that they are recommending. Finally, engineering designs are now bought from Buganda Road on the streets of Kampala rather than from the professionals. Let the gentleman in the studio stop lying to us.
Nabuta is
I think he's getting it wrong.
I think he's getting it wrong
on the issue of timber and metal. Can you clarify that?
The choice of using timber or steel, that is calling metal and concrete, is a decision that has to be taken between the developer and his design engineer. I cannot stand in the studio and say use timber or steel or concrete. Each one has pros and cons, and each one has where it's most applicable. So that's a decision that can be taken between the developer and the professional, depending on things to do with the budget and functionality and durability and the like. So Mr. Nautayo from Bududa will give you the facts as they are. The issue of people buying designs from Buganda Road, I don't know if it is happening. I hope it is not. If it is, developers and listeners listening in, please don't. Like, I will reiterate that buying designs off the shelf is simply very risky. It's very risky because you're simply using guesswork. You're just saying because something exists in Kampala, it will exist in Kabale or Chisoro with my hills, or it will exist in the lowlands.
All right.
And scientifically and otherwise, that would be a grave mistake.
George in Mulago.
There was a question about studies on indigenous materials. Work in progress. We have a plan to set up a National Building Research Center. We hope we'll get there. At the moment, we are leaving that work in collaboration to universities who we collaborate with in terms of research, student research, and also guided research with members of staff to see how we can generate knowledge for industry. George in Mulago wants this program to be on a monthly basis, but he asked a question. He says, for the second time, I suggest that you make this a monthly program in this station. Then he says, for town councils who issues occupational permits, there's a big mess in those mushrooming towns, which needs serious attention from the board. How are the events here being recorded? And he also says, we have multi-billion buildings where casuals are not considered in terms of occupational health and safety. Who is responsible for the aspects of human health? Then we have another comment coming in from Patrick Bonyo, who is in Busega. There's a challenge here in Uganda. We tend to occupy and paste what other countries are doing, not considering the geographical area. I have my 50 by 100 meter plot, and the kind of demand required just discourages me as a developer. They want soil sample, electrical and plumbing, and others. More so, they want me to have 3 meters off the perimeter wall. Some of the laws or policies requires a sensible approach.
I have even submitted all the documents required, but up to now the plan is not yet approved.
Yes, thank you so much, Kenneth, and Ugandans who are sending in questions. It shows that you're following what is happening here in studios, and you're interested interested with what is happening in the sector. We understand that this sector is growing so fast, and everywhere you pass, you see a building. So as the board, we have to ensure that we also expand the presence of the building committees, such that whoever wants to seek permission to construct, there's an authority, there's an entity that is supposed to give them that permission. So the person who has sent in a question asking whether we have building committees in town councils, we are coming. So far we've ensured that all cities have building committees, all municipalities have building committees, and a few districts. Our expansion is going on. In the next few years, we hope that we shall have coverage across the country. On the issue of copying and pasting, it is what we've had with STC, that someone went abroad, they copied this building method, and they wanted to implement it here as they got it from abroad. And that's why we advised the minister that this can't happen, because the materials they use that site may not be necessarily the same materials that we are having here. And also the human resource, because the issue was how we are using these materials, how we are using concrete, how we are using timber, and how we are using steel. And you know, Kenneth, and the listeners, that most of our timber here in Uganda is not graded. The timber we get from Chibuye, the timber we get from Bwais is not graded. So which kind of timber are people using? Can it sustain the buildings, the projects Ugandans were undertaking using this new method? So that's why the board had to come in and advise the minister that STC, as it is now, is not safe, and Ugandans should stop using it. And we are happy that so far Ugandans have listened to us, and we are not seeing so many other sites going up or starting up using this method.
All right.
Yes.
Very quickly, we have a few minutes remaining, so I want you to emphasize some of the key messages, the things that you think the listener needs to keep on board as you enforce the building regulations. Engineer.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, and our listeners. To start off with, we are a public body. So all the codes I've been talking about and standards, and even the report of STC which led to the prohibition or the sustenance of the prohibition order by the Minister of Works and Transport, are on our website, nbrb.go.ug, and you can freely download them. And we would be glad to have a conversation if you do not agree with any of those provisions in those standards and laws and the reports that we have published. 2, to remind our listeners that please allow the people that understand construction, the professionals, to guide you. And like we said at the beginning, the cost, while the public perception maybe is too high, if you look at the entire project cost, you realize that actually the rates that we are talking about may be affordable for the kind of guidance that you want them to put on. There was an issue of safety. OSH, occupational safety and health, concerns are also considered in the building control legal framework. And actually, if you have a class A structure, for example, you're required to have a health and safety officer on site full time. Lastly, Kenneth and our listeners, please remember, let us always remember that there is no price too high for safety. You may build your building as best as you can, but you don't work in your own building. Your child doesn't go to school in a building set up by yourself. You don't go to church in a building built by yourself. So each of us has a duty to play, and let's do the right thing. Ultimately,
Yes.
Safe building will lead to better living, and that's a dream that we hope all of us will achieve.
Herbert?
Yes, as we conclude, my parting shots. 1, developers, let's use the right materials, and let's use these materials as prescribed by the professionals. Secondly, let's seek approvals. Go to your building committee, get a building permit before you start any development. Also get occupation permits, because most of you developers are non-professionals and you do not know, you can't specifically say and know what your professional has done. Please, that occupation permit will be your security in case of anything. Those who want to get more information about NBRB, you can contact us on our toll-free number 0880 220 746. We also remind our stakeholders in the sector that we have the National Building Control Awards on 4th December, which is Wednesday next week at Speak Resort Munyonyo. Thank you and good evening.
All right, with that, we come to the end of Spectrum. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing your views. But like you've heard from the listeners, they want you to keep engaging them, and they want this show to be monthly. That's an issue I think you should look into. But from me and the team here in studio, we wish you a very good evening. Up next, we have the news in English. Thereafter, the Salt.